Hey, hey, Coffee Compiler Club. We are here today to talk about compilers and language runtimes and whether or not drilling holes in your head is a worthwhile endeavor, or you should believe medical advice from Vice magazine or not. Yeah, don't believe everything you read on the internet. You're being recorded live. You'll be up on YouTube in a couple hours. All right, where do we begin? I'm having a Gradle versus anything else chat on another channel that I need to put
That's
aside.
easy. Anything else?
Anything else other than Gradle versus anything? Anything? Yes, that was my opinion. Is anything else than Gradle?
Oh,
Actually,
maybe.
I'll change my answer. It's anyone else. As long as I don't have to do it, I don't care.
That's the trick. Last time I did a Gradle project, we burned. Cameron lies. He's here, but he's not. He's getting coffee. We burned a full-time engineer, a good full-time engineer, keeping up with the Gradle make build system, and he hated it, and I totally believe it. And I was like,
I'm just always amazed at how slow modern build systems are. Like
yes.
a incremental build with no changes takes me, I don't know, like 10 minutes in my current.
Wow,
It's horrific.
Yeah, where are you at?
Well, I shouldn't say after making a complaint.
This would be Oracle because grandfather
I used to work for Oracle, but yeah, in our case, it's like a lot of code generation happens all the time. So we compile like 1,000 Java files, even though nothing has changed. But even then, like thousands of Java files along with generation shouldn't take, it may not be 10 minutes, but it's like it's many minutes.
Wow. I mean, I certainly did, code generation for C2 and for Hotspot because you're code generator. So you ran through the code gen file and did thing, and you've been in makefile. The makefile looked for no changes on the source to the code gen, and if there was, he built it, and then that built the next artifact the next. And if there wasn't, you were done.
Yeah, I remember I tracked it down to some like it was Abro or something that couldn't, like, its Gradle plugin sucked and it couldn't figure out that it shouldn't regenerate, and then that just set off a dependency chain of let's build a whole lot of stuff.
Right. And so the answer is that you don't use Gradle.
The modern way to do this is to boot the JVM separately for every file that you build, right?
It definitely helps to do that.
Geez.
I like the idea of using code as your build system, and Zig did it. It turned out well for them.
I have done it myself in a prior life. Nothing to do with anything recent.
It's probably too expressive a tool, right? And leads to
it's debuggable.
No, right. So
yeah, that's true.
So you boilerplate your way to the normal things you'd expect out of a build, which is here's a files of input and files of output. And that covers like 90%. You throw in a couple for like, I need to copy a file if this got touched to that. There's one or two of those specialty guys for exactly the case you're talking about review code gen. And then you have a little discipline and it's done. And I have totally had that as a built-in system, not here, a different system where I would hit the build and it would look at the make itself would look at its own self first, rebuild itself if necessary, if you changed how make behaved. And then it would go look at all the dependencies for the compiler, do the code gen and as necessary, and then do the code gen. And the answer was, if you had no changes, it was microscopically fast. It was microseconds. And if you had changes, it was whatever long the changes took. But the build itself, the tool for the build itself, was immeasurably fast. So it's just a stupid thing going on. You have it tracked down to some real issue where now you have to deal with the Gradle plugin to make it work.
Yeah.
And I'm watching some other guys suffer through Gradle plugins for the last several months, 1 month, and he's just been miserable at it. And I'm looking at what he's trying to accomplish, and these are like stupid things that I'm afraid I don't know what I'm talking about, but I claim that I could do this and make using the obvious other tools where I had to grab another tool in much less time. But I haven't done it, so maybe I'm shooting out of my mouth. But I do know that Gradle sucked at H2O, and I would never let it into any of my projects ever again.
So I want to interject some history in here. So I was reading, what was it? It was Odin's FAQ, and they had some quotes from CAR Org. So I linked the course paper. So it's Hints on Programming Language Design is the name of it. And so like he has a section that is actually relevant. It's like fast translation. He's saying that instead of constructing a fast translator, language designers turn to independent compilation, which permits a programmer to avoid recompiling those parts of his program that he has not changed since the last time. But this is a poor substitute for fast compilation and has many practical disadvantages. So,
Well, there you go, Levo. You're on the right track.
Hey.
So Alan, was it still a performance issue after he upgraded his vacuum tubes though? I didn't hear the rest of
yeah,
the story.
I mean, that's what I'm wondering is whether he's right. Cause like I've been going the independent compilation route. I mean, I know it's called incremental compilation because like they aren't actually independent anymore.
Oh, I think you must go to independent compilation because you cannot scale a linear thing you do it every time. So you need the scaling factor. But
mean,
as Mark was just talking about, you have to have the dependencies correct or you don't get incremental compilation. What you just said, Mark, is we don't have incremental compilation because our Avro is screwed up or the Gradle plugin for Avro or something.
I mean, it's a bit of both. Like you can have a fast compiler without incremental compilation, and that will, I think, realistically, for most languages, that will get you far enough because there's not that many languages we dealing with, like, I don't know, Facebook scale or Google or whatever. It's this giant complex piece of software, and you can do incremental without like a fast compiler, but then it does kind of raise the question, like why bother with like a complex incremental support system with caching and blah 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 if you can instead make your compiler faster as a sort of starting point. So I think you really need to do both.
Well, one reason why I do it is because of I don't want to deal with headers, and incremental. It's slower to do a check and not compile, and then decide to compile later rather than just do it all at once. I'm probably going to do some incremental when I have modules, but that's going to be far from now.
So you have to do incremental eventually, or you simply can't scale, no matter how fast your base is.
Well,
But
3 millions for a second, you know.
You can go a long ways with something that's starting out.
I
Really
wonder
40 gigabyte code repo is fine because it's divided into 8,000 microservices.
Yeah.
There you go. You have a different
Oh.
problem if you have 8,000 microservices.
What's the largest code base that you guys have worked on? Mine was 2 million.
Couple 100 million lines.
Oh, you worked on you're on Oracle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, gotta be.
If it's Oracle, you have to maybe like account for like how many Oracle lines translate to like real lines, similar to like dog years.
So, well, I'm not talking the database, I'm talking applications, but yeah, I mean, it's the database team is very good technically. The applications team was not.
Yes.
It's
pretty
thicker than
expensive.
Linux.
Makes sense.
Minimum deployment footprint was 19 servers.
For the database?
No, for
application.
for the apps I'm referring to. There's like 165 million lines of code at some point.
Wow. Wow. Fine.
But
Were they
you
all
know,
generated?
No, I'm sure they're all
Copy-pasted.
written.
generated? No, I'm sure some of it was, but you know, there's a lot of cut and paste in application code.
Shit.
This is where
But
Oracle
yeah.
makes their money.
Mono repo for an unnamed bird app had over 10 million lines of Java, over 10 million lines of Python, and over 10 million lines of JSON in the same repo.
I thought it was Scala.
They do use a lot of Scala. They also had over 500,000 servers to run it. So
Yeah, but that was parallel scale out as opposed to minimal.
But
right.
again, you know,
servers.
no one binary was that big because it was 4,000 microservices. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but
I
when you
just
take
quickly looked at my largest, that was GitLab, Apparently it's 3.4 million lines, but I'm guessing it's including some files that aren't actually code here.
This is GitLab, not GitHub.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it is saying 220,000 lines of JavaScript. I'm guessing that it's including some generated stuff. It's a little tricky because the app has like a whole bunch of directories, so it's
Right.
let me see what it does if I exclude the
Yeah,
ones.
we definitely had a bunch of thrift interfaces that were compiled to Scala and Java and Python. So
Right.
that's a lot of generated code.
Right. I mean,
I
whenever
just
I
wanted-
did JavaScript GUIs, there was a lot of passes. You ran the JavaScript through, and then you added a linking, and you ran for another pass and added more linking. It was all very bizarre.
My experience in JavaScript world is that if you go and use any sort of openly available widgets, they're often a widget in your framework of choice wrapped in a widget from some other framework, and it could be wrapped several times, and eventually it's just jQuery. But
Okay, I'm certain some of the shit I used bombed out of jQuery too.
yeah, but you basically, you import a calendar widget and you actually get 30,000 lines of code along with it.
Oh, minimum. Holy shit. It was
That's every package
unreal how
manager.
much crap came in.
Yeah.
Like download npm was 3,000 or 4,000 modules or packages or whatever, but I was doing React Native, MobX, and flow script, and I had to have minimum somewhere with 300 to 500 packages got sucked in, packages, which each brought in, no freaking clue, thousands to hundreds of thousands of lines of JavaScript. It was like an enormous pig. And you tree shook and you compressed and minimized whatever the hell, and it was still an enormous pig. And it ran on your phone reasonably okay. Okay.
So one of those that got me is I saw a project that was importing a library because they wanted the like exact colors that were the brand colors. And it ended up pulling in the entire widget framework. It's like, dude, you needed six-digit hexadecimal numbers, and you accidentally pulled in whatever
It's
was
the-
400K of code.
It's the JavaScript mindset. Just include it.
I never heard of a
Import,
package
whatever.
manager that didn't go that way.
So I think there
Package manager is told it to include something, it's got to include it.
Yes.
All of it.
Right, but the
Yes.
tree shaker is supposed to be not including all of it.
Right.
Like, does tree shaking not work? Why does this happen?
I've never heard of tree shaking in a package manager.
No, it was always a step for me that I ran separate.
The best is sometimes you can say import this package, but include this giant blob of stuff I'm not going to bother about.
I just put a link in the chat that is somewhat related to this topic.
Oh,
Pretty good
I'm
read,
harvesting
actually.
credit cards.
So if you want to see how to, it's basically a how-to. It's a how you would abuse a package manager to basically take over the world.
Yes.
Yeah, and people
I just
complain that
checked,
I don't want one.
the largest I worked on was GitLab, 910,000, so a little less than a million. And on the topic of JavaScript, about 150,000 lines of JavaScript. It's slightly troubling.
Yeah, here's the relevant quote. Oh, we find Google Docs. See, the relevant quote here is, lucky for me, we live in an age where people install npm packages like they're popping painkillers. And that's the path to success here.
Yeah, and I think that like leave it at that point, like a lot of package managers go this direction in the sense that I don't think it's like a package manager per se. It's if the language doesn't offer, I think, like enough in the standard library, you end up with this pattern where people, they make a package for like some colors or some basic stuff. In Ruby, for example, it wasn't that bad. Like Ruby standard library is quite decent, but still people use packages. There's like, I don't know, 15 HTTP clients that are widely used. And yeah, if you pull in like Rails, for example, you get a ton of dependencies, but I think for like a web framework, that kind of makes sense. Especially this sort of holistic framework where it's like, oh, it's a web framework, but it also has background messaging and you can send emails and you can do your homework. But in general, for like as far as I remember, there aren't really these cases like NPM where there's like a package to left pad a string. I'm pretty sure it exists. I've seen it, but I'm pretty sure it was also done as a joke in response to this announcement or news article, whatever, where left pad broke a bunch of builds.
Left pad broke the internet, yeah.
Yeah, so I think in case of JavaScript, it's a bit of a special case because even though, for example, Node.js, they took the sort of bare bones language and put more in the standard library, it is still very bare bones. It has this thing where like Node.js will give you the ability to spawn sub-processes, but there are no decent collections in the standard library. So if you need like a
So you think
binary
these
tree,
explosions of dependencies are in some sense a failure of the standard libraries, that they're just not big
Yeah.
enough?
It's the batteries included concept.
Or
I mean, I certainly think there
my-
should be an HTTP server in the standard library of a new language today.
my question was, is there a way to strike the right balance if you do not provide the functionality, just provide the interfaces, so you don't have to download 100 million versions of something?
I
Let's
watched
say,
Elm bootstrap itself trying to get a standard libraries going. And they ended up with 2 layers of freely available packages. One where anyone could add a package, like an upload from Maven and record and docs and blah, blah, blah. And the popular ones, they brought into the curated version where they went more time on the docs. So they gradually bootstrapped a standard library from the open source community, but
And
always.
as they bootstrapped it, they also shut down your ability to bring in outside libraries.
Did they shut that down now?
Yeah, at some point they so there was like for generic libraries, they had different access than their curated ones. So certain capabilities were only available if they published the libraries.
Oh, I see.
Something like that. It was weird. It was part of the death of Elm. That and the fact that it was abandonware, but
I think that it opens up a lot of room for problems. Like Clojure did this as well. Initially, like a long time ago, they had this contrib library thing, and then some stuff ended up in the standard library, and some stuff ended up in these contrib libraries. But the problem is like the people who put a bunch of work into thinking that they're going to be adding something into standard library, and then it doesn't get added. They're all pissed off, and it's just, I think it ends up fairly rapidly being better. Once it gets to not be a tiny group of people, it's just better to not try and deal with that.
Do a contrib, boy.
Picking and choosing whose libraries are good enough or whatever.
yeah, but you have to, at least to me, provide some kind of interface. Let's take a Future, for example. There are a bunch of implementations of Future. A common interface between them would allow you to switch them effortlessly. But
Yeah,
the
but it's
right kind of
important to get-
interface is a different game, of course.
It's important to get to like a comprehensive standard library for sure. Like otherwise,
So
Of
York,
course,
when you
of
say
course.
locked out the native code, like Elm had this port notion, you could call any JavaScript, and then on return, he would read the JavaScript and parse it into correct Elm objects. Was that closed, the ability to call native?
yeah, I just linked it. Some article, somebody who like left the Elm community. Essentially, yeah, I believe this native, like as in native JavaScript, not
native
machine
JavaScript,
code.
yeah.
It was operating on a whitelist, and you had to basically be approved to go on that whitelist.
Wow.
And outside of that, there's just no option. And the author of Elm was basically like, yeah, take it or leave it. So people like, okay, we'll leave.
We'll leave it. Because I called like some high-end graphics display library from Elm to do my fintech shit. And if that wasn't on the whitelist, I couldn't display the volumes of data I needed to display.
No, I think the
probably
whitelist was a fairly recent addition.
probably wouldn't work anymore, Cliff.
Yeah, I'm hearing. Well, that sucked.
That would be pretty frustrating if you had spent a couple of years on an app and then suddenly were locked out of recent versions of Elm.
Yes, exactly. Fine. Right, whatever.
Seems funny that you wouldn't allow a user to choose what they want to use when they're building their app.
Well, it goes to, you know, beneficial dictator for life or whatever that's called. The dictator for life is decreed on
Benevolent.
killing myself, so he kills himself.
Right.
What do you do about it? It does suck.
Yeah.
Well, we're locked back, as you said, we're locked back to 2 versions ago where he wasn't killing himself. Okay.
So
Yeah,
we're
well,
back again
we-
to restricting too much or not restricting at all.
I think the starting contrib sounds like a good way to start, but maybe set expectations a little more careful. And then what I just heard was at some point you got to cut it off anyhow.
Yeah.
You know, if you got 2 people, 5 people, you need a external contrib library to have any chance. You got 100 people and they're contributing. Now you can dial back the contrib library and say we're working on the main or we're not. Because some of the contribs are just junk, and that just was what it was, you know. And there were a lot of redundancies in the Elms contrib section. There's a ton of redundancies, and a lot of them were just junk. And you picked and choose if you couldn't find, you know, the worst of the whatever worlds. It's fine. And gradually things moved into the main library and it got better. But I still pulled from the contribs all the time. And that was, you know, this was some years ago. Fine.
Well, I wanted to say, like, sometimes, you know, having a bad library is better than having no library.
Well, that's what I was at. Yeah. I didn't want to write all that crappy code. So I worked around whatever I got out of contribs. Yes. Bad was better than none. Mm-hmm.
You know, but certainly, you know, it's worth knowing that, say, like, this is a good library. It's like, you know, it's, you know, like if you have a standard library, right? You say, oh, this comes with the C++ distribution, you know, it's a good library. It's been vetted by lots of people. It's fast, it's memory efficient, blah, blah, blah. You know, whereas, you know, this library, it's some GitHub repo that I've never seen before. And so it's probably, you know, not that good quality.
Yeah, it takes time to sort through them. You can't take somebody else's trust, or you have to come up with a, you know, correctly curatable people to curate your list. In my case, I was doing fintech data. It was a little bit of a specialization. I needed fast graphics libraries. I needed all kind of funny, weird data compression techniques. And then I had a lot of math to go with my graphics to display stuff. And then I had some fancy graphics, heat maps, and all kinds of variations on pick lists and stuff. So it was non-standard. So I didn't expect everything would be in the standard library. That was kind of obvious. But to say no except standard library just sounds like stupid things. Like, hey, can I throw a ChatGPT link? Can I throw any sort of machine learning behind the scenes that I can use to do something locally? Not in standard library? No. Why? Never mind. I'm whining. Okay, something else. We've bashed Gradle, we've bashed Elm. What else can we bash today?
I think Aaron made a good point or question about including an HTTP library in the standard library.
We should bash
Because on
that.
one end, I very much agree with that, because otherwise you end up with like 15 competing ones. But it's something I plan to do, but it's very much a slippery slope in the sense that if you are building a language from scratch, and let's say you do not want to bind against OpenSSL, for example, that means you have to write an HTTP client, probably an HTTP 2 client, which is, you know, a little different in terms of its format. You need an SSL library. That means you need AES, X509, a whole bunch of elliptic curves that you need to implement. You need Cha-Cha 20.
I would claim there's an easier first step here, and you throw down what is basically the old one-page HTTP server from years gone by, and then you work on whatever other standard library things you want to do with HTTP that as a full service client. You throw one down right away that's dumb and simple and no S's on no HPS's. And because it'll sort a bunch of people's easy problems and show that they're on the right track, and then they're going to invest in a heavyweight. They're going to grab, I don't know, fucking Jetty or something, whatever they're going to grab. They're going to grab something monstrous. but they want to start with, give them something you can maintain yourself and that just gets you started. And then walk
Right,
away
but
from it.
so it's more like like that makes perfect sense. And you can of course write an HTTP library that just binds to like libcurl or something as a starting point.
Yeah.
But you know,
Fastest with the
eventually,
least
if you want to, I guess, be independent from that, it becomes this really slippery slope of like, to implement this, we must first implement these other 50 things, and that requires me to understand cryptography. I plan to do that because I hate myself, but
right.
it's
So that
Giant
ended up being why Go
Like,
has so much
if-
cryptography in its standard library, was they put into the standard library every cryptographic function that they needed to do HTTPS.
Which
basically, don't you have to watch out if you're
Good
trying
reason
to,
to have modules.
if you're trying to like accomplish building a language or building a project, and you create a sub project within that project, which is itself a full-time job, you're never going to finish the actual project you're trying
Right.
to do.
That's what I was saying. You grab the one pager and walk away, and then it's somebody else's job to implement the full.
And
when you're rich
yeah.
and famous and have thousands of users, you can implement the full service.
And the other thing is that having something in your standard library in no way precludes someone saying this sucks and I'm building my own.
Exactly. That's
So
the
you
control.
don't actually prevent the 15 alternatives. In fact, you're more likely to just have 16 alternatives because of this.
Yes.
But if you leave the right hooks, so let's say you want SSL, you just implement HTTP, but you leave the right hook for SSL for someone to implement it. That's a different kind of story. Not to fork your library, but leave the right kind of hook. And somebody would say, oh, fine, I will do it. Implement SSL and hook into your library, not fork your library. That's a big, huge difference.
And the other thing is that when you get one or two alternative HTTP libraries contributed, you can decide to bless one of them and make it part of your standard library. You can basically steal it.
Which is generally what people
A lot
actually
less
wanted
work.
in the first place.
and so I think there the approach for like in the case of an HTTP client, the idea I have in mind would be to have a client that's a bit more low level. So it's not like in Python you have the requests module, and off the top of my head, it's literally request.get URL, boom, done. You have a get request.
That caffeine
idea I had
there, Alan?
the idea I would have in mind is something a bit more low level, and to maybe make the HTTP parsers, for example, part of the public API, and then say, hey, we have a reasonably easy to use HTTP client. You can use it as a base for your own sort of more high level client, or you can write your own entirely. But hey, we have the HTTP parser, so you don't have to re-implement all that logic that comes with it. So it's kind of like how you expose it. Like, do you expose it as sort of this black box where it's like, oh, there's a few ways you can use it, that's it? Or do you kind of drop down a bit more low, like level wise, and expose sort of individual building blocks?
Make a toolbox.
A toolbox of functionalities.
Yeah.
But can you make some kind of hook for, let's say you don't want to implement this right now, but leave it as an interface for everyone to implement it and use the library, not fork your library. Can you make that?
I mean, in theory, you could. I think SSL in particular is a bit of a tricky one in the sense that in my specific language, but also in others, I use non-blocking network I/O.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that's implemented, it currently doesn't support sockets created through like a CFFI. Because there's some additional data structures the system uses to keep track of things. So that will be something you would have to first do, sort of pull in that sort of non-blocking stuff into your standard library and expose these sort of building blocks.
Yeah, but as soon as you say non-blocking, you pull in a lot of other things.
Right. And the second
model,
thing I
memory
remember
model.
that in my case, for example, I was considering using this library written in Rust called Rust. It's a bit confusing. It's Rust LS, but Rust TLS, I guess, is the joke. The idea being like, oh, they've already done all of that, maybe as a starting point. And that one doesn't depend on OpenSSL, so it's a little easier to distribute. The problem, if I remember, is that their API is quite invasive. Like, it's not like, oh, you have your standard library socket type, and before a read you have to call this function, and after that other function. No, it's you get your own sort of wrapper types. And so you end up with this problem where if you have a piece of code that needs to support both SSL and regular sockets, it essentially has to deal with two what could be completely different types. So you end up with this setup where if you want to support it transparently, every single socket operation that you expose has to say, oh, are we using SSL? Okay, then interpret it as this type and do this thing, and otherwise do this other thing.
But that's specializing the kind of socket to the type. Can you do
Well, so
something like a
essentially
pipeline? Earlier in the pipeline, you initialize the SSL and hand off something look like a socket.
Right. But then you end up with, let's say you have, let's say 10 functions that you say implement in your, host language to do your socketing stuff, accept, bind, etc. And you expose those to your standard library. If your socket types are, they could be completely different. That means you basically now need 20 functions. You have accept and accept SSL, bind and bind SSL, read and read etc. Right?
So in Java land, there was native byte buffers and direct byte buffers, and they just lumped them together, or are direct and heap, and they lumped them under byte buffers as an abstract class with two implementations. And then you trusted the JIT to optimize it because they all showed up in the hottest inner loops of all your IO.
That's not it for Yorick. That's not working either, because you have to prefix all of your functions with two separate types. Whatever if some other functionality comes.
Common super type and two subclasses.
Well, that's the way. That's the way.
So my point here is more that if you have, let's say SSL, but other cases where this would apply. If you're binding against a library that defines it, ideally that library has a couple of routines where it says, okay, this is how you sort of you create the socket yourself, you set whatever options you want. Then we expect you to call this function so that we, do something with it. And then for every read, you have to call this function first, then you call your read, and then you do this, right? There's a couple of, basically a checklist you have to follow instead of, here's a black box, it has a read method, it handles everything for you. Have fun, right? I think OpenSSL can do that. I've seen some examples of people using it with non-blocking IO. But there, the idea I had in theory is if I, ignoring the enormous amount of effort, if you implement that all yourself, you don't have to do that because you can just reuse your existing socket functionality. You do need some different types in your standard library, I guess. So you have a socket type and a TLS socket type, for example. But internally, that TLS socket would just be built on top of your regular socket type and reuse all of its functionality. But yeah, that it's a ton of work. I have it planned out. It's probably going to take me a couple of months. Yeah.
That's the problem. Implementing your own functionality on libraries.
All right.
Okay, next.
Yeah.
I do think one of the points, though, was a pretty good one, which is whether or not you provide the implementation, you definitely want to standardize the interface. I think it was Theodore saying that.
Yeah.
Because that gives you the ability then to have, you're not going to have perfect interop no matter what. I mean, we've all gone through that. It's like APIs are great, but there's always something slightly different about every implementation. That at least gives you the chance, over time, to what Derek was saying, to kind of cultivate and pick something out of the set of options without breaking everything completely.
That was exactly my point. You want to standardize and then let the people not fork you, but add implement your functionality you intended to. You will get You will never get it perfect because there are so many moving parts, but as long as you get the commonalities, you're in much better spot.
So I was I got into a fight with TCC the other day, and I'm
Who won?
considering writing a backend, but I'm not 100% sure. Because I would have to do dwarf information. I have no idea how long or complicated that'll be. Yeah, it was just not producing. I was running printers, and it was just like not producing the correct information. So GDB just printed everything, like vomit a couple of variables out.
You okay. You're trying to get debug information pushed through TCC from.
Yeah, so most of the variables are fine, but for example, my stream reader, it just does not want to produce the incorrect information. Like
What
maybe I
reader?
can patch TCC, but that might be as much work as running my own implementation. I don't know.
DWARF?
Um,
DWARF is enormous.
is it?
And there's like a thing where like a million different ways to do the same kind of stuff, except you have to do it the GDB way. So you have to be bug for bug compatible with what GDB reads.
I briefly looked at
Maybe-
this as well and then threw my hands up.
See, Elf, I like looked at and can understand. It's not difficult, but Dwarf, I don't know.
I think the dwarf standard alone is like, I don't know, 30,000 pages or something.
Yeah, it's ludicrously huge.
Maybe not that much, but it's a ridiculously large PDF document.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not trying to parse anything. I just want to admit the thing.
Well, right. That's just what I'm saying, though.
That's
Figuring
the
out
stuff.
what you're going to emit, how you're going to emit it, such that it's compatible with GDB to go read it is the issue.
Yeah.
You might be better off
Okay.
just rewriting GDB rather
Dwarf
than create files.
docs, PDF. Yeah, something.
And any things that you want to do that don't map fairly cleanly to C++ semantics are exceedingly difficult to express.
Really? Maybe I should write a debugger then.
All right. The Dwarf 4 official docs are 325 pages, not 30,000. Nonetheless, that is a lot of pages.
Is it written in like legalese?
Well, it's written in PDF. I'm not going to read it like line by line to try and decide it's PDF. I'm still going through the title pages here as I'm clicking forward. Pictures, images, format, vendor accessible. I'm still in section 1. Here's tags. No, it's semi-sensible.
Dwarf 5 is 477 pages.
I'm only at Dwarf 4, sorry.
So like writing the information in LLDB or I mean LLVMIR, that was not an issue. Like most of the things translated like okay. But yeah. But if I'm using LLVM, it's not going to be as fast as what I'm used to.
And the reason you use TCC is for speed, so you could go debug. So you kind of want the debug to come out fast. Too.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I don't know. I think you have to sweat some bullets there, see if you can get something out. But I would not try to do all of Dwarf yourself as a first cut.
Yeah, well, it would just be as little as possible just to get it working. But I'm also thinking since TCC is like okay enough, maybe do it after memory safety. And Cliff, if I get memory safety, you have to write a program in my language.
Well, the obvious thing I'll do is try and break your memory safety first.
Okay, yeah. It's not going to happen, but I mean, breaking it's not going to happen.
Oh,
Now, I was
scary.
hearing, you're saying memory safety. I'm looking for like memory management, malloc and free replacement without, the Rust usable and without the Rust annotations. Java requires a garbage collector.
Automatic
that's-
memory already works.
I keep hearing you say that, followed by, oh, except we can't really do these things. So I was kind of waiting for you to come along and say, well, I can do these things, like have
And-
non-stack like lifetimes for my hash tables and stuff.
We naturally land on the linear types to eliminate garbage collection. Anyone mess with linear types to eliminate garbage collection?
Yes.
Okay. We
Oh,
have at least one.
linear, technically affine types, but you know, potato,
Affine,
potato.
okay. Mm.
I mean, that's what Inko does. This Rust does it. Was it Austral, Astral, whatever?
Austral. I don't know how to pronounce. I put
Yeah,
I
let me
will put
add it to the doc. They do something similar. They do it slightly more restricted, in the sense that in Rust you have a borrow checker, which means you can, you know, more easily pass references around. In Austral, Jesus, the name. I believe borrows are scoped. So you essentially create a borrow, and then within its scope, it stays valid. And then they use regions to sort of figure out how long they're valid for. It seems very interesting. It seemed a bit kind of like lifetimes, but you know, whether you call it regions or lifetimes, I think in the end it's sort of the similar end goal where you have to annotate certain things saying, hey, this belongs here, whether that's a region or a lifetime. And there's a language called Vale, which is
I'll put the link. Yeah, it's halfly written in Scala. And
so it does takes a similar approach to. I think it's more close to Inko in that sense, where you can effectively just borrow whenever. And the two are similar because both Inko
regions.
and sorry, go ahead.
They have the regions. They have a read-only regions, and this is how they're tracking the okay.
Yeah, Vale does a couple of things. They have like sort of different strategies for approaching different problems. It's actually based on the same paper that I based Inko on, so that's sort of where the similarities come from. The interesting thing what Vale does is they, in the case of Inko, I check for dangling references when a value is discarded. So you check, hey, can we safely discard it? If not, kaboom. Whereas Vale essentially has weak references where they check upon dereference, because their assumption is that dereferences happen less frequently.
Yeah.
And then they have, you know, regions and a couple of other things so that in certain scenarios you can sort of avoid the cost of that.
What was that?
If every dereference might have become a null, when does that matter for your cost model?
Well, so it's not so much that it's not a weak ref in the sense that it returns null. It's more like a checked weak reference in that when you access it and the data is no longer valid, it will terminate. There is technically a soundness issue there in their implementation that they, I believe they use a 64 bits counter. What they do is they essentially track generations where you create an object, it's, you know, maintains a counter, and then it sticks that in the pointer and in the object. And when you read, it checks, hey, are these counters still the same? If not, that means somebody else is now using the memory. But that technically has the soundness problem that it can overflow. So yeah, if you allocate in the same slot 1 to the power 64 plus 1 times, you could have a essentially use after free. Or I guess use after reallocate. I'm not sure how you'd call that. But it's an interesting model in that they the various approaches they take for that.
I'm reading pages from, I guess it's Astral. Boretti means Matt put it in the chat. And it's a decent write-up of the goods and bads of like the obvious ways you deal with these affine functions, affine types for memory safety. I haven't got to the bottom, so I'm sure there's a punchline coming.
Pretty long. You won't get to the bottom.
Yeah. Well, yeah, okay. I'm a quarter down, so yes, it'll take a while. It won't happen during CCC. Fine.
Quick question. Is there a binary diff that you guys like?
I haven't used a binary diff in Eons. Like, what the hell? Why do you want a binary diff?
Because obviously I would want to look at elf or dwarf.
You know, oh,
I just
diff
threw up
your
some
output.
code and yeah, I try to look at the difference.
And you get your dwarf output from your two different sources in some text format instead of the binary format, and then do a text diff.
Well, I would want to emit it in binary, but I don't. I know how I can get like a text representation, but
Pretty print.
I
Add a pretty print flag to your output. Don't just output it in binary, but have a flag that says, okay, the dwarf comes out in text on purpose so I can look at it.
I just want to know how complicated the binary format is.
Go read your 400 pages of dwarf.
I think it's easier just to look at a couple of hex decimals.
It probably is, but it's one of those funny things. It works up until it doesn't, and then you got to go back and understand the spec and figure out, you know, what little bit somewhere you missed because your types were a little this versus a little that, and GDB got confused and hated you, and he got off, and so he read all the wrong things, and he crashed and burned and whatever. Yeah.
My favorite
All-
story like
all
that
hex
comes from
dump
when they
and
were
then-
trying to write the spec for .doc. The EU said you can't store any documents in an unspecified format, so Microsoft had to go back and write the spec for .doc. And they tried to go through the code and realized that there were code paths that they didn't understand and old versions that they didn't understand, and they tried to look at a whole bunch of documents that already existed. And they ended up building a tool that would take a doc and rewrite it as an XML format to prove that they had understood all of the different pieces of .doc. And after about 2 years of this project, trying to specify .doc by the equivalent XML that it turned into, they realized that their XML had become rich enough they could just use that as the document format, and decided that docx was their new format that they were going to use, and that would be the specified one for all EU documents.
Oh,
That's how
God.
it came about.
So their
Funny.
conclusion was, we have to write a spec for .doc. On second thought, let's just come up with a new file format that's easier.
In XML.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the X in docx. It is a zip file full of XML.
Oh, God.
Did you not know that
Yeah.
your Word docs were all XML files that were
I have-
zipped up in?
I have open office. I don't have any docx's floating around. I do presentations and stuff.
Open office,
Sorry?
open office.
Or LibreOffice. I think it's open.
LibreOffice.
One of the two.
There-
Might be LibreOffice. Whatever one I have even up now. I guess I could go ask it. Even right now wants to update LibreOffice. There you go. Libre. Did open office die? He was on the on and off on the
Yeah, it's all the same, I guess.
right. I thought
Yeah.
they kind of semi tried to smurge, like smashing merge together at some point. But they never got very far in the first place from each other. Fine.
You know, the cool kids all use Google Docs now.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, that would make me not a cool kid. There you go.
Yeah, I use Google Docs for that because it's the only one that doesn't drive me mad, in the sense that I basically almost never, for example, need to write a letter like once every 5 years. And whenever I do, I forgot what I used last time. So I had to write a letter a few days ago to the tax authorities for various reasons. And I normally, well, it's like, hey, I have LibreOffice, let's try that. And found out LibreOffice doesn't have a Dutch spelling dictionary, which is kind of nice if you're writing a letter in Dutch. And you hardly write Dutch these days, so you kind of need it. So I ended up, using Google Drive for that because it actually is decent enough for this.
If I had to write a letter to my local tax authority, I'd be inclined to literally find a typewriter. I think that would be hysterical.
I mean,
I had one up until prior move. When I moved to Sunnyvale, I lost my typewriter. Yeah. The one I inherited in high school from my parents as, you're going to school. We know you're college bound. You need a typewriter. So I had a typewriter when I went to Texas A&M. I probably used it. I know I used it at Texas A&M. Holy fuck. Fine.
So I don't know. I mean, we've discussed this so many times, but I still want to discuss it again. Tabs versus spaces.
The Discord says
Stay
it
on a
all.
typewriter?
The average number is 2.7 spaces per indent.
So 3 spaces, you rounded off then.
No, you have to do 2.72. No rounding. Or you
So the
must
best
be Go, or
approach-
Go must be tabs or something. I don't know. Why
The
did
best
Go
approach
say
is you
all
start with a
tabs?
tab, like as your first indentation, and then spaces. That way, people who like tabs can still customize the width. But if they don't, you still have your minimum nice indentation.
Yeah, and I have a
But you could choose a like a universal constant like E, which is also 2.7.
there you go.
Or
Yes.
or pi, but I would not choose C. C is too many.
Well, I mean, I want to get into like the question, if I mandate 3 spaces as the language default, like, not the standard, but default. How many people will complain?
If you mandate tabs, you're Go. How many people bitched and moaned? Well, you're not Google, so I think you'll have more issues.
Well, no,
Google
that's the
came through
thing.
and said, I'm paying your fucking salary. It's tabs. Suck it up, Buttercup. And they, okay, I'll take my salary.
No. See, a lot of people bitched that it was tabs. Nobody defended tabs. They just said, "Oh, that's what it was." So, like, we can't change it now to spaces.
I'm just saying, if you mandate, you better have some hard backing, or people will like blow you off.
So I think, like, as far as the value, I mean, on the surface, it doesn't really matter if you use, 2, 3, 15 spaces or whatever it is. For all, maybe you indent your code with the letter Z. Doesn't really matter, right? The thing is, I think this was thrown around in the past, but there's a, what's it called, like a weirdness budget, basically.
Yes.
Where there are certain things whenever you have a project you can do differently from existing projects. And some of those things can be quite unusual. Others maybe not so much. And so I think indentation is one where you sort of consume that budget very quickly because people are very opinionated on it.
Yeah.
And because certain patterns are so prevalent. Like basically the common ones are either tabs, 2 spaces, or 4.
Yeah.
And I think you have a Linux kernel with like your tabs, but you should format into like 8 spaces by default or something.
No, they have tabs for indent and spaces if you want to move the cursor without an indent level.
Right. And so if you come with 3 spaces, it's not so much that it's wrong or worse or better. It's just so weird. People are going to hyper focus on it. Weird in the sense like nobody else does it.
Yeah.
And the reasons for it are not like they're debatable, right? If you had done a study across, let's say, 10,000 developers and you found 3 spaces is scientifically proven to be better than 2, people still complain about it, but at least you can sort of wave that in the face saying like, hey, at least I did my research.
I wonder if that's language dependent, because JavaScript lived for a long time with the callback stack of doom, and you wanted 2 spaces so your pyramid of doom didn't roll off your monitor.
Right, and that plays a role, like in I think in languages that use white space, it might matter less because you typically don't have like the closing brackets and whatever on their own lines, and it's, for whatever reason, they tend to be a bit more compact. But yeah, if you have like indent heavy languages, you probably want a little less space. So you have to take that into account, right? So rather than say, hey, I want to use 3 spaces, is that going to give me problems? It's more like, look at sort of the syntax of your language. And then I would say pick either tabs, 2 spaces, or 4.
I would never,
because that's what people are used to.
Yeah.
Well, no, see, like I have the studies. They literally say that 3 spaces is the most readable. Like there's no question about those studies. Like I've read the research.
And I get all my medical advice from Vice magazine, just like you do.
There's this concept of, I don't know how legitimate it is, but I've heard of it, and this conversation reminded me of this concept of weirdness budget. So like you can do so much stuff weird and people will accept it.
Yeah.
But do you really want to use up your budget on how many spaces you're indenting by?
Well, see, that's the
It seems
thing.
like
It's
kind of-
like, I mean, like everyone keeps bringing up the weirdness budget. I don't accept that there's a weirdness budget.
Okay,
Like,
so
you know,
that sounds
I've looked at the science, and the science is that as long as you make decent choices, then people will use it. Like Perl is weird, people use it. Ruby is weird, people use it.
Do
I mean,
people
there's
still
not-
use Perl though? People used Perl when it was the only scripting language.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's a nice solution in that if you use an older version of it, it's everywhere. So, I mean, if you want to guarantee that
Right.
there's a language
is
available,
Part of being the only scripting language.
Well, I mean,
At
I
one
think
time.
I'm still using it because there's, it's not like, it doesn't have like a fancy JIT implementation like the rest of the languages. But like, I mean, that's not a
but
failing.
why would it matter? I mean, you're only using it for 3 lines of code because in 3 lines of code, you can write anything in Perl, you just can't read it.
Yes.
I mean, the point is, it's an automation language for when batch files don't do it for you. And it's good at that. It's just,
Yeah,
you
but-
can't read the code.
I would claim that the interesting question here. Okay, no, I'm gonna redirect conversation back to like an auto formatter. Include an auto formatter. Get rid of the I'm picking 3. The auto formatter, which is entirely optional. Hey, see ya. It would be defaults to whatever you're gonna default to. Add a flag says, 2, 3, 4 tab. And defaults are 3 or whatever you think. But don't put it in your language as a mandated thing.
I also noticed in your doc, I was looking through your docs, which by the way are incredible. And I
Wait, are you
noticed,
talking about my docs? Is that like a compliment?
yeah, it's a compliment. Those docs are like, honestly, I think I want to hire you to do my documentation. So but I did notice that you specified that comments must be in English, and so I'm assuming you're going to enforce that, and you won't compile a file where the comments are not in English.
I'd have to use grep to see where I said that, but no, what I said.
You said proper English sentences.
Oh, proper even.
Oh, that's the
proper, yeah.
style guide. Okay.
But is it going to be
use redneck
American
Texan?
English or British English?
British English. Yeah. I want to use redneck Texan.
I assume that each comment needs to start with "Dear Sir."
Okay, no, so like
Hey,
the style
y'all.
guidelines are just things that like scare people straight. Like they aren't actually like meaningful guidelines.
Except the spaces thing. That's
Except for
completely
spaces.
critical.
Oh, Jamie said it in the Discord. It was good. What did he say? It's an artistic expression. Fact is, spaces, tabs, width don't impact code at all. It's purely stylistic. And I like freedom of artistic expression. There you go. I think I will not be spending my weirdness budget chopping down people's artistic expression.
But like there's this thing. I mean, we have this discussion like several times. There's literally no such thing as a weirdness budget. People they will look, they will say, oh, that's different. Then they will learn it and they will just use their language and not.
So let's do a scientific study, since you like scientific studies. How many people on here besides Alan thinks there's no such thing as a weirdness budget? Okay,
All right,
there's your
I'm going to repeat this study, but invert the question because negative questions get fewer answers, right? Okay, raise your hand or say yes if you believe there is a weirdness budget.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
3/4 or at least.
Yeah, I'm
So
not
I-
sure about it. Like, I'm not saying there is or isn't. I'm just not sure.
How many languages have you written in?
Well, like a
How
couple
old are you,
lines.
Levo?
Yeah, but more than 10 lines of hello world. How many different languages have you coded something in?
Maybe like 8. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Come back again when you're not a.
Okay, and
Come on, 8.
I should clarify like the competing hypothesis. So the weirdness budget hypothesis is that the amount of the readability of a language is how familiar you are with each piece of syntax in it. Based on
That is not what I would
experience
consider.
with
No,
other
that's different.
languages.
That's different. It's also about consistency too, like, because there's some languages that do some things differently, but once you learn it once, like, you apply it across the whole language. So yeah, it does spend a little bit of weirdness on the first step, but then it's like, okay, it's at least consistent across the thing. I can, once I figure it out in one spot, I can apply it everywhere.
Where Perl is an example where that is not true.
Perl is an example of everything bad in programming
Yeah,
language.
Everything
design.
is a special snowflake in Perl. Yeah.
Yeah.
So so the competing hypothesis is what I'll call the readability budget, which is that each piece of syntax you evaluate how readable it is, and then overall the readability of the language is sort of the product of the readability of each piece of syntax.
And how do you evaluate readability?
And I will add one more. There is something when you see it, you have to you will guess what it will do. So you can you extract from the context what it will do. So it's not weird.
And the strangeness budget thing is kind of historical too, because if we were designing, let's say there were no programming languages ever before, but we had all the knowledge we have today, would we ever design something that looks like C? And the answer is probably not.
Not, yeah, no way.
Something that would accomplish the same thing, but structurally different, right? So, but the reason I used C++ is because it compiled C, so I could start from C and add C++ features to it. So the strangeness budget was actually, from an adoption point of view, was very close to 0 initially, right? Yeah. And then the reason I picked up Java coming from C++ is because there was, again, 0 strangeness, well, very close to 0 strangeness budget. Like, I could read Java code the second I downloaded it and looked at it. I was like, holy shit, this is like C++, except it doesn't suck. Sorry, Levo.
Yeah, no, I think it sucks too. I just still like it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have a love-hate, as I've told you, I have a love-hate relationship with C++. I love to hate it and I hate to love it. But yeah, I mean, so in that sense, Alan, like, strangeness budget isn't so much like it's strange in absolute terms. It's more that it's strange coming from what people already know.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. So there's an example in my documentation. So it's single equals for assignment and comparison, right? So basically you write, A equals 1, and that assigns 1 to A, and then you write if A equals 1, and that
whoa. Assigning it to 1 doesn't make it true? That's weirding me out.
And so the comparison just works. And so so it's very strange for people coming from C languages, because they look at it and they say, oh no, that's wrong. Like, you can't have a single
I hate it.
assignment.
Yeah, you always have to put the constant on the left so you don't accidentally assign it.
Right. But
that's a good answer.
In terms of they've done studies where they give code with single equals to newbies who've never programmed in C before, and they're like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. They have an assignment, they have a comparison. There's no issue at all. And so
the productive programmers I went to hire aren't newbies for very long.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that what if I want to just have a predicate that I'm going to use in a few places, and I just want to say x equals a is equivalent to 1. So then,
yeah, how do you turn?
Now you have x equals a equals 1, which is a little bit ambiguous.
How do you get the Boolean out of it?
You use parentheses. I just said that.
Use parentheses. So a equals 1 in parentheses is a Boolean, and a equals 1 without a parentheses is an assignment. It's not a bad answer. But
it's also consistency. Like in Pascal, you've got the gets operator for assignment. What is it? Colon equals, right? Yeah. And that was fine. Like, there's nothing weird about that. And it's more how many weirdnesses do you encounter? Because they're each like a mosquito bite or someone hit me in the shins or something, right? It's like, 1 you can survive, and 2 is okay, and 3 you'll get through if you have to, but fuck it, I'm not doing 4. Like, That's why it's called a budget.
Well, and I
so
think
I-
that to add to it, it's also contextual in the sense that
That's exactly what I was
Um,
gonna say.
if you have like I would say libraries, for example, you put in your standard library, I have a feeling people are typically a lot more permissive of them doing things in a different way. So yeah, as an example, Haskell is probably the only language that really actively uses monads and has more than one user. And so by that nature, it is very weird compared to other languages. And syntax-wise certainly is. But it's because it's a library, you have the option to, if you want to, opt out of it. I don't know if Haskell actually lets you do I/O without monads, but in theory, you could write, say, a wrapper around it and use that and pretend you're not using monads. So in a sense, you have choice, right? And I think that's where people are a lot more permissive of having to pick weird choices. But if you bake it into the language, let's forget about space, for example. Let's say that the keyword that you use for declaring types is kittens. I'm just making something up, right? So instead of type blah is whatever, it's kittens A. That would be something where there is no other way around it. And so if you don't like it, it's this constant reminder like, hey, I'm using a language that does things the way I don't like it to. Besides it being very different. So with spaces, if for example you recommend 3 spaces but it's optional, like the parser doesn't care if it's spaces, tabs, or something else, people will complain about it, just as how they might complain about other things, but again, they still have a choice. So at the end of the day, it kind of depends on what are the battles that I want to pick. I think personally, indentation is not really worth hassling over. Kind of similar to like what characters should you use for single line comments? Should there be a hash, a double slash, or something else? It's really something you just pick one and just go with it, basically. As long as it's not like completely different, people will be fine with it.
For single line comment.
Yeah, basically, I like the way York put that, and I'd say you get away with 1 or 2 unique weirdnesses. Just keep it 1 or 2, and you should be fine.
See, I really don't like how the context changes the behavior. Now, in my language, I do a couple of things where the context changes something, but it doesn't change the behavior.
You mean the parens around assignment? This is like a Google Docs question here. We'll throw some examples in Google Docs. Go talk while I pull up Google Docs. We'll throw some examples in.
Okay, so my example in the chat was A equals B equals 0. I just want to assign both variables to 0. So I don't know what that's going to do in Alan's language, but as I was saying, I don't like the idea of putting it into an if statement and it changing behavior. So in my language, I do have a few places where context affects what happens, but it's not the behavior. It affects mutability, so you get more. You have to be more explicit if you want more permissions. It doesn't actually change the behavior as like how the code is going to run. It just changes how the compiler will complain or not complain.
Oh, geez. All right, let me.
I'm going to grab another cup of coffee.
Leva, while you're up, grab me one too.
I'll take one too. So I was thinking more about the weirdness budget thing, and I think there's another subtlety to it maybe, which is that, or so I guess I should say strangeness budget, I think is the real word. Anyway, I think that people will kind of forgive the like transgression once they see the justification. And so, but if something's just flat out arbitrary, and you can say, well, I have the research or whatever, but ultimately it is arbitrary. you know, that's not going to be, you know, you're not going to get that point back. People were just going to think that it's just a weird thing, and you know, it's just one mosquito bite that's festering.
So Alan, I threw out the left to right versus right to left translation for assignment changes meaning, whether it's wrapped in parens or not. And if there's no parens at all, then I guess the answer is that should be 2 assignments, and then it would be a syntax error.
But how would you remember to do all these things without messing them up? When
Yeah,
you mean the other and write the one, we mean the one and write the other.
No, you put parens. Putting parens around is not a bad answer, in my opinion.
Of course,
You
that
have to write them.
Well,
I
the other
believe
thing
Boolean
is,
assignment.
the other thing is, it's if equals, if assignment expressions, if assignments are not expressions,
Yeah.
then it becomes easy, right? So like the first one, A equals B equals 0, in C, that's, you know, assign 0 to B, assign that
B to 0.
R value to A.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say assign B to A because it's not quite that when C compiles it, but yeah. And then, you know, but if you drop assignment, if you demote assignment from being an expression to being a statement, then that doesn't compile as is. So then the compiler would say, oh, he must be comparing B to 0 because comparison is an expression.
I would claim you'd be better off demanding the parens if you intend for a comparison.
I was not judging, by the way.
Okay.
Either I wasn't saying positive or negative. So I wasn't arguing for one or another. I was just explaining that C with the assignment is an expression thing.
Right.
That does really cloud a lot of the syntax in C.
Ah.
But eliminating the assignment to be an expression, you have to finish to a new line.
Yeah, you have to
Or
go to
maybe
new line.
you can.
A equals 0,
Yeah.
B equals 0. I would like to maintain the assignment semantics, but I would take the far right-hand value and just assign it directly to B and then directly again to A. So how I would try to read that. The Java forces an interpretation in the middle. So if I have a strongly typed thing and I want to assign it to a current variable, a local variable that is weaker typed, and I want to maintain the strong type to a new variable,
Right.
I can't do it in Java without adding a cast, which I know the JIT will remove, or I have a bunch of syntax I must do. I'll do the example for that one down below, but it's a case where assigning it into the first variable and then reading it from the variable to the second assignment is worse off than just taking the right-hand side all the way across.
Yeah, and plus sometimes you get compiler errors because, you know, with the even though it knows the value on the right side, it's not using the value on the right side to assign to the thing on the left. Yeah. So
Right.
So if A equals 0 might be okay, but A equals B equals 0 might not be, or not 0, but something. Yeah. Because
So
of
if
int and byte, for example.
I have a new bar foo here, where bar foo inherits from foo. Whoops, can't type. And I want to assign it to a foo because I have some intermediate thing I've done with foos earlier. There's a bunch of stuff here. I've used foos in a sentence a bunch before. And eventually I discover the correct thing as a bar foo, and I want to assign it to X. But I need it as a bar for future work to do with a bar foo. I can't do this in Java. I must break that up into 2 assignments. And I think that's kind of a waste. Fine.
All right. So I checked PL1, which was the first language to implement single equals, and that's not for.
Wait, Fortran?
No, PL1.
Is first the language to do single equals assignment.
Yeah, so equals for both assignment and comparison.
Oh, and comparison. Yes. Okay. Fortran had weird comparison syntax. Yes.
Yeah. So it's so this first one, A equals B equals 0. It's just that B equals 0 parses its comparison, so it doesn't have chained assignment.
So as soon as you have a first assignment on the left, everything afterwards is a comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So there's no nested assignment.
Right, no nested assignment. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so like so like this parentheses A equals B is just not valid because so I mean I'm certain that you can play with it and pick other choices. It's just like, PL1 is simplest.
Oh, there's a good example from Anonymous Walrus. Yes. Here's your Java puzzler.
I'm a walrus today, apparently.
Apparently, yeah. I don't know what I am. That's exciting.
I guess I had too much to eat.
I kind of assumed I started with the first letters of the alphabet, so the first person in was Aardvark, but we never got up to a walrus, so I don't know how that came around.
Oh,
I
other
think
people.
All right. So then we got I equals B equals 0. And then, I don't know.
Well, right. If you
Yes.
just take the 0 and you plunk it down for a B byte, okay. If you plunk it down for an int, okay, it's a 0. You can't assign an int to a byte without a cast.
So we dropped the assignment expression in ecstasy so that we could do things like, like a call to a method and use the equals as the
Oh, named parameters.
as name parameters.
Yeah.
It looks quite nice. And it, not having assignments be expressions also just eliminated a whole bunch of weird bugs that people accidentally get by forgetting a second equals and stuff like that.
I'm both ways here. I use assignments in arguments all the time, not all the time, but definitely they come around. And also named arguments. If you have a lot of arguments, named arguments are nice. If I got 2 arguments, I generally don't care. But occasionally I have function calls that have like 3 booleans. And I try to intersperse them with other things, but just makes sense to have 3 booleans in a row, and then I fucking want to name them.
So with 17 booleans in Java, I'm quite often inserting, /* name of parameter /
I have that
value.
I have that in my code as well.
Because otherwise you end up with foo, true, true, false, 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 true, true. And it's like, what the fuck? Like it's meaningless.
Yep.
I have
Now, to be fair, Java's enumerations being actually relatively cheap. I mean, they look expensive if you're just looking at the language from the outside, but they're pretty cheap. And so quite often replacing Booleans with enumerations can make code a lot more readable in Java since they don't have named arguments.
Right. So it sounds like a lot of syntax to.
Sorry, Derek.
No, I was just going to say that I've started using just maps for named arguments. So even in Clojure, you can do named arguments, but I find that I far prefer using a map in almost every case. Usually those types of functions that have a lot of arguments or named arguments are not, don't tend to be hot path functions anyway. And when you have a map, then you can pass it around. Like I can just sort of have a set of config or whatever, and I don't need to like enumerate each option into the thing that I'm calling next.
You've given up argument safety types.
And what about typos?
Yeah. Well, there's that too.
Typos, like it's never been a big issue for me. Maybe I don't think I'm a very accurate typist, but like, yeah, I hit typos, I find it in the first test, and then I fix it.
Yeah, your XC, someone has an XC comment here that says for Strauss-Cut, that looks like size equals 4.
Yeah.
Which maybe you want to think about the syntax there. And for C or AA, it would be size is assigned 4, but size is a local variable. And you pass a 4, but you don't talk about the named argument size. If foo has a bunch of default arguments, you didn't get the right one. And there's a size :4. That's interesting. Yeah, I haven't figured out what I'm going to do with right. And then the actual comparison that the double equals works. That's the C Java syntax, AA, whatever. But yes, a lot of folks go there. and no
Yeah,
named
for-
argument syntax.
Alan doesn't like the concept of the strangeness budget because he wants to be strange.
Well, no, I just know that so like one of the most common like newbie programming
Cameron, what are you doing?
double the equals. So you forget to double the equals, and then you get this weird assignment error, and it's like terrible. And so you just do, oh, single equals is the syntax, and then like it's never a problem. It's just weird. For,
And
like,
Alan, you are aware that you have a giant red button on your forehead that says hot button for, you know, strangeness budget. It can be pressed at will by anybody.
Let me check with ChatGPT to see if that's true. Hang on.
I think the term, Cameron, is rich in strangeness. That's why he doesn't care about budget.
Okay, but this does remind me. I was thinking I'd make this like syntax survey and give it to newbies and like ask them what they think the syntax should be, and that's how I design my language.
I'll hit
like,
another one. You know, that survey is going to suck because it's all self volunteers, so it's highly biased.
I think you'll end up with
Well,
Perl,
yeah,
but go ahead and try.
I don't have a
I'm
budget.
curious.
So your language for beginners?
Yeah, like that. I mean, like think about it. Would you design for the people who are of like battle scars and have used the bad version for so long that they've forgotten what a good syntax looks like? Or do you ask newbies that have never used the language before and are, you know, have no preconceptions?
And make sure you have a committee.
Newbies have the most preconceptions.
So you can have Strascott designed by committee of newbies.
I mean, if you want a language that's like newbie friendly, you basically end up with something that is AppleScript, and I think it's quite clear how that ended. I mean, it was an interesting concept, but basically nobody used it because it's so weird to write in.
Yeah, I threw in a link for a beginner language.
And I think they're like
we could use
asking, like there's value, of course, in asking beginners sort of their perspective on things. But to put it very bluntly, people are very stupid, and especially they're very stupid about things they don't understand. Right? I think the best, perhaps slightly off-topic example is during COVID. Suddenly, everybody had an opinion on vaccines and all that thing. When before that, they probably didn't even know what the word vaccine meant, right? So if you ask beginners, like, hey, you know, which of these things is better looking, for example, you're going to get completely random answers. Because what's going to happen is you're going to show them, let's say, 4 slides of code, let's say, with different indentations, and you're going to ask, you know, which one is different. Well, the newbie doesn't understand what the code is. So the only thing they can judge is the sort of visual aesthetics. And that's going to be very, what's the word? Very specific, very personal.
No. So like the way I'm structuring the survey is first I have a description of the code in English. So I say like, this code adds the number 1 to the variable A or something. I don't know.
now.
Right, but there's
Cameron,
the thing, right? If you're
no indentation
using ChatGPT.
if you're asking complete beginners, it's a mistake. I did some like how do you call it, coaching on these sort of coding events years ago, and these are people that are, you know, they don't know what a terminal is. They know how to send an email. Somehow they've gotten in their head that they want to do coding, but they don't know anything about coding. If you tell them this assigns the variable to A, they'll be like, what's a variable? Right? Because this has never really been a thing. Yes, they might have had mathematics, 30 years ago in high school. And so the thing is, if you want people to have a meaningful, give you meaningful insight in your design, they need to first understand it to some degree.
Well, yeah, no, that's why I'm trying to get ChatGPT to explain everything at a 6th grade level. So, I mean,
yeah, I'm having trouble. I don't know if this is sarcastic or genuine, but
the survey is going to be a full programming course bundled with a survey.
That's what I'm looking at here.
My point is more, if you want insight in beginners, you need to make sure that these are, let's say, 1st or 2nd year bachelor students. People who've done some coding, they have a little bit of experience, but they have not, let's say, solidified or sort of calcified, like thing where like your bone gets stuck because the
calcified.
Yeah.
calcify that. Yeah.
Right. So that hasn't happened yet after 40 years of doing the same thing. But I think if you ask, let's say 100 absolute beginners, you're going to get 100 completely different inconsistent answers.
I would say don't ask the beginners because they don't know.
Yeah, so what we need
they don't know
actually is a
enough.
survey that looks like this current website that Cliff's playing with, right? And so whatever answer they put in, you pretend that it runs correctly and gives the output that was desired. And so basically what you're doing is encouraging them at every point, saying, "Oh, good job. How'd you figure that out?" Right? So you never mark anything as a bad answer, but you just collect all their answers as this is how you should do it. What do you think, Alan?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was sort of the survey. I mean, I wouldn't lie to them.
think
Say
then
they
you-
got it, but
Then you use ChatGPT to generate a language that looks like that.
I was trying to get Cameron to do ChatGPT on his sample Struska source code there.
Well, a lot of people like to write languages for themselves and develop things for themselves. So if Alan is wants something friendly to beginners, I'm imagining he's going to have a tough time implementing the thing.
Are we actually talking anything about compilers today? We're still on the weirdness budget. I'm not certain that that's, maybe we are. Fine.
like we're discussing fundamentals of language design. Like, you know, you have to make sure you're writing the right language before you can write a compiler.
It's not a technical talk today.
Maybe to sort of add to that. So let's say you are designing a language for beginners. What do you do if those beginners are no longer beginners? Like, do they just stop using your language? Because
Well, then
as they
let
become
them-
more experienced, the
Like
things that,
Scratch.
like many things that would have benefited the beginner may now be holding them back. Like AppleScript, for example, I remember it being quite great for very simple things like, oh, if I run the script, open the file explorer and navigate to this directory. And it was nice because you would write that in more or less English language. But once you want to go beyond that and do something a bit more complex, like, hey, send a request here, parse this header, do this thing, it becomes such a pain in the ass because you're basically writing 4 pages long in this sort of weird syntax when in most languages, like, 4 lines of code, basically.
Now, this
And
is
so
spot on.
if you design a language for beginners or for experts for that matter, you have to somehow bridge that gap. And as with, I think, many things in life, if you design for the extremes, that bridging will be very difficult. So you have to kind of not necessarily sit in the middle, but let's say between 20 and 80%, roughly.
I spent a day just a couple weeks ago teaching kids from ages 5 to 15 how to program. And we started with essentially an 80s level era Nintendo simulator because he wanted to get them some eye candy and had them move a little widget around a board and bounce off walls and
You have to capture their imagination.
yeah, you're right. Yeah. And it started out with a game because that's a best easy way to capture imagination. So it needed to have graphics. It needed to have a real-time event spin loop. It was baked into the language. And it had a impact or collision detector baked in.
Was this Scratch or something else?
It wasn't Scratch. Gosh, it was like bits 80 or something. I have to go find it up again. We did it at J Crete. I stayed an extra day, did J Crete for kids. It was a lot of fun.
I did something like that at the beginning of the pandemic, teaching all my nieces and nephews to code, and started in Scratch, and then we eventually moved to Java, and man, everyone was like annoyed. Like all the fun went away.
Right. Yeah, this one you couldn't do much outside of a sort of a not even a platformer. You probably might have been able to do a platformer, a flat square screen moving things around, but to give them some intelligence. Opened up eyes to like even have variable assignments where you printed the value and there was a timer and it would count down. They didn't have a check for 0 as the first thing they would put in. They'd watch their counter go down and the game was supposed to end when it hit 0. Well, it went to negative, it kept going. Every one of them, their eyeballs opened up. and they started to understand the concept of assignment and actions that came afterwards and stuff. So this was like a real learning experience, but it wasn't about syntax of the language. That was just obnoxious things they had to get through.
I would say the language is just a ceremony. You have a concept in which you embed the language concepts in. So in order to be understandable, so it's like you have to have a different concept in order to explain the programming concept. You cannot just explain it because it wouldn't make sense right away.
Yeah, there's too much going on, and there's too much that's not mathematics. It's the state model of the universe that's not baked into people's heads so clearly. Yeah.
I was reading. What was who were you teaching again with the counters and all?
I was at this conference called JCrete. Everyone, well, never mind. So I was at a conference. We had a kids' day. Local kids from the Crete countryside came in. There was a wide range of kids. There were like 60, 80 kids. They ranged from 5 to 15. Most of them, half of them had a laptop of sufficient power to run a very trivial game engine, extremely trivial game engine. Half of them did not and had to borrow or beg or steal. There were a lot of sibling setups where they had one laptop they shared. They had minimal programming experience. The 13 and 15-year-old got further, got faster, they got it better. But I had at least one 8-year-old who got fairly far along. They all had some room to have artistic expression into what they were doing. Like one of the kids started out by having a screw up where he used a brick wall for his character, and he ran with it. He was the brick eater. And that was okay. You know, it was artistic expression. But I was able to teach, you know, the 5-year-olds a little bit less. They got tired and they went to playing with the script, the sprite editor, just to do graphics. But any kids, I would say most of them between 8 and 12, got at least as far as a little running mannequin running around a map that they didn't actually build the map and picking up bits of food. And they probably got as far as printing a score out with the bits of food.
Sounds like Snake and a fantastic game.
Yeah, I mean, it's all done in like a couple hours, and you gave them a break, and then they went and did Lego Mindstorms, and the other half came over and did programming with my group. There were like 5 or 6 adults running around for 20 odd kids, plus their parents who weren't programmers either. Like I said, it was actually a lot of fun, and some of them got it pretty quick. It was kind of cool watching the eyeballs open. But it wasn't about, like, the syntax was just obnoxious and in the way. The compile, edit, debug cycle was important. I actually started all my sessions pretty quickly. I started every session with each kid. I had to spend 5 minutes. Okay, we're gonna do this edit, compile, debug, and it's a cycle. You're gonna edit, you're gonna run, look, it's gonna not do what you want. You're gonna go back to the editor and edit, and you're gonna run, go back. So you have to get the cycle in their head. That IDE was more important than anything else.
I'm a fan.
I'm inclined to say that seeing something fail so much times teach you more about life to keep trying to keep pushing. It has a bigger concept in it.
So you really like JavaScript?
Of course, why not?
Having a fast turnaround cycle in your face is really helpful. However that's done. And then you automate those steps, and then you can incrementally learn way faster. So if I were to, if I look at the IntelliJ as it stands today, the ability to start and make an initial empty page that prints hello world and then moves up to doing something like prints a table of primes, it's just an enormous amount of learning overhead to get that first Java page open and edit a little tiny thing, get it to run. And I think that does a disservice to everybody in the community, including IntelliJ themselves. There ought to be some initial setup that says new, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm just a newbie, and it just plops up an editor, throws down a boilerplate class, puts a hello world in there. I actually put a hello world in there and says, go hack it. First thing they did was basically hello world. They ran and it did something and it was very static and it threw up some stuff. And there was some text written that said something about a game and whatever, something said something stupid. And I said, okay, now we're gonna go back through and we're gonna edit the string and you're gonna put your name in it. And 2-3 go arounds and they finally got the edit, compile, debug cycle, and they got that they had a power over the programming to make it change. And they got empowered. And now they were ready to go to the next round. Cliff as a teacher of little kids. There you go. Watch out.
Watch out.
Okay, next topic.
Kind of like this concept of progressive disclosure in Swift. And I think that's easy to illustrate by example of where it's missing in C++. Let's say you are trying to teach someone C++ and you just want to teach the proper and modern C++ concepts. And you can go pretty far with just teaching to references. The moment though you introduce classes, you have to introduce instance pointer or the this keyword, and that's a pointer. So now you have suddenly a cliff where you have to jump off and you have to talk about pointers right at the moment of introducing classes. So this is an example of violating this progressive disclosure of complexity principle.
Matt,
Yeah, but you
I
can
actually
simplify it.
think I
Okay.
actually think it's not really true, because if you have to, you're talking about this current instance, you don't have to go to the pointer. You don't have to go to the pointer concept. If you have say this, you're referring to a specific value in your program, and you just you can skip the pointer concept out.
Well, no, because you have to introduce the syntax of pointers dereference just to be able to access this concept. If you want to access data member through the this keyword, you have to use the arrow, or you have to dereference this and then use the dot. So you have to introduce the syntax of pointers at minimum.
If you
Just
have
to use it.
explicit pointers, okay.
Exactly. But that's the point. That's in C++. This is an explicit pointer, so that violates it being a pointer violates the progressive disclosure of complexity.
I will agree on. Yeah.
That's the example exactly.
You can always simplify it by using templates.
Cameron.
Who doesn't love templates?
Oh, templates. Oh yeah. I love templates.
But
Wow.
Templates taught me something new the other week. I do not want to get into it, but it was new.
I think templates teach us all something new every time you attempt to get anything done with them. Here is a new failure mode you never thought of.
So to Matt's point, I mean, that's actually kind of what he was saying is kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to really dramatically simplify the type system, at least kind of dramatically simplify the slope of the type system. So having in C having the reference semantics versus the pointer semantics versus the value semantics, that's a pretty hard learning curve. It's powerful, but difficult. Even in Java with the dual type system between the primitive types and the object types is pretty weird. So there's some languages go straight value type only. What was the conversation we had online this week with the copy? Was that Alan? You should always copy everything.
Yeah, R went that path too. It has the giant performance fail. And if you don't care about speed, and it's convenient as hell.
Yeah, and we went reference only, so everything is a reference. Although it doesn't have to be at runtime, it just is from a type system point of view. But again, it's about simplifying the model.
Python library, I think it's called Einstein, that uses underscore to indicate that that operation is in place, which I thought is also interesting. This coming from targeting data scientists coming from R. Maybe that makes a little bit more sense because they are probably used to copy semantics, but you really need in place when you operate on big tensors.
Yeah. R is copy semantics, but you can painfully step around it. And the data scientists who write cool algorithms typically are not the systems guys that understand lifetime memory management things. So fine.
I kind of think that people teach programming languages kind of wrong and weird. Cliff, you tried my mini game for my language.
I saw that. It was okay.
Well,
Yeah,
I would say that mathematics is already taught wrong and weird, starting from elementary school. Go on.
So it wasn't about mathematics versus not. It was just get over the syntax and the simple meaning expressed as a gamification.
Yeah, it took you probably played less than 5 minutes, and
yeah, right.
And I don't know how comfortable you felt at the end of it, but
oh, it was clearly as a senior developer with many languages I've used in my life, it was not necessary. But it was a useful way to get some of the funny ones that I didn't quite, what were you trying to do here, sorted out pretty quickly. It was fine. And it was tedious in places because I knew that already, but it wouldn't have been necessarily tedious for somebody who didn't. If you had a more junior person on there, that'd have a different feel for it.
Yeah, I cut a lot of that stuff out. Like I got a couple of feedback and figure out what was tedious about it, and yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can believe it. Yeah, no, it was reasonable.
Yeah, so
I have it's on my list or my head of like when I get to the point where I want to talk about AA and have somebody else look at it and figure out what's going on. How do I do it? And that wasn't terrible.
Yeah, so I think that's if someone has programmed before, doing something like this will get them up to speed in like 5-10 minutes, and they don't have to read like 300 pages or a reference.
What's that other one? Learn you in X and Y minutes.
Yeah,
the website for.
I don't remember. I don't think I visited that.
We've had it up on Coffee Club even recently. It's fine. Oh, here it goes. Wow, Google had it and then lost it here. There it is. Boom, fine. Yeah, learn X and Y. They all have something that looks fairly short and on purpose.
There's also the Rosetta code.
Oh, and Rosetta code, sure. Well, I don't know if this is necessary to put this up. Oh, somebody threw it up already. Fine. Yeah, fine.
The thing I dislike about reading pages is because you don't know what part you're gonna get confused at. So since the minigame I made, you had to write something in, you will immediately know if you confuse something, and you don't have to do any reading. You only do the reading if you're confused. So I thought it was just really efficient. And
I think the goal of Learn X and Y minutes is to let you compare and contrast other languages that you're curious about. It's not actually to get you strong enough that you could write syntax correct running code. That like somebody says Clojure does X, it's really cool. Well, what the hell is X and Y, and do I care? What? So go learn X and Y minutes. I got 2 pages of Clojure code to read with a bunch of comments and simple shit. Here's how you do simple shit. Here's your fancier shit. You get to the weird shit pretty far along, and you're like, oh, that's different. Like the permanent collections or whatever it's going to be, and you get to compare and contrast as a in a few minutes, like what's special about this language versus other things. But that's a useful, it's useful for me at least. All right, I'm drank too much coffee, and then I drank too much water, and now I need to take a break. And we've slowed down.
Yeah, I didn't realize the time. It went pretty quickly.
Yeah, we had a long discussion both on tabs, weirdness budget, and language for beginners, which are both actually kind of fun things. They're very accessible.
Next week we'll talk about VI versus Emacs, I hope.
Oh, geez. Yeah, let's start that one.
Yeah. I actually have one quick question I have thinking about. you quite often you have a binary and you have a configuration along with it, and it's quite often you lose the configuration or you forgot to copy the configuration, and somehow you have to instruct it to configure your program. You quite often do it with the flags, but when the configuration becomes too large, the flags become too many and the program becomes too hard to read, and we want these flags to persist somewhere. How about you allocate some portion of your binary at the end or the beginning in order to use it for flags? Is that a viable option? And you just
You have at least 3 configurations. That's the problem. So you have a configuration that's binary data or text data or whatever that you actually want to include in your build, that it's going to be the same, at least the same starting point for everyone in the universe. Then you have a configuration which is an installation configuration, which is like, okay, for this thing, at least for the time being, it's going to use this location here on my hard drive and this place for its data and whatnot. And then you have a third configuration, which is the configuration that you're not allowed to put on the disk, but it has to be there at runtime. So it's like, okay, it's a password I put on the command line to start it up, or something equally horrifying. Meaning, don't ever do that, please. But the idea is like you have different stages of configuration.
I mean, like you have something that you pass every time because you want the binary to work in this way. So you allocate a few bytes in the binary that you add an extra flag to, let's say, set, and that will write into the binary. And the next time you want, it's just leave it.
Can I offer a different view here? The problem you have is that you have a thing that in your head you've mentally got one of this program, but it's actually broken into 2 parts, which is a specific config and the program. And if you wed the 2 together physically in the binary, then that one program for everyone else on that same box now behaves exactly like yours, and they might want something different. But if it's your own solo machine, that sounds like a great answer. Whereas if it's some shared configuration, now you need to deal with how you use a shared piece of the binary and my configuration. So you could move the ownership problem to the config. Don't track the binary, track the config file. The binary tracks itself fairly readily. You want to track the special snowflake you did in your config. And the config internally as a shell script just reaches out and touches the binary with whatever path there is at the moment. But if you move things, you would move the config, then you go inside the config and find where the binary got to in the new place to config it about.
That's the problem. I want only one file. One file for it.
Then copy the binary and smoosh the 2 together. There's got to be a way to add a dado layer that's somewhere in there. Yeah.
You just can't have default options. Like, I don't know why you have to have.
No, he's saying I got a binary from somebody else. I've built it, or I got it as a binary. I want to add options that are default. Yes. I want to put them in the binary. By appending things. Oh, I know this can be done. I've seen this before. It's like a self-unpacking. There is a utility that will take your command line launch, which all your flags on the command line and in the file, and smoosh them in the binary as a fucking B64 compressed bit in the shell script. And you run the shell script, and he unpacks the binary and adds the config options and runs it all in one go. So from your point of view, it's one file. It has your binary in it. It has your config and shell script text in it.
That's the goal. If you leave a few bytes for configuration, you can edit them always you want, but they leave it. They just stick into. They hang on the binary, and you never want. You don't want
this
to
keeps the binary in the shell script. So if you have the script file, you have the binary too. That was what I heard you say. Otherwise, you have the 2-part problem, and I would say the special part is the config, because the binary you can go find again.
Okay.
All right. Anyone else? I'm going to do it. All right. Till we meet again.
I guess it's just a comment. I'm reading the 11-page DWARF documents that you linked me, and yeah, DWARF doesn't seem too bad, but I still don't know if I want to do that anytime soon.
let us know. I'm curious, how long does it take you to implement something not even big in DWARF, just some portion of it? All right,
All right, see y'all.
bye.
Bye.